Today's episode is brought to you by FantasyChamps.com, your home for fantasy football trophies, rings, and championship belts. Use our code BALLERS to save 10%.
Welcome to the Fantasy Footballers Podcast, coming to you from the Play Draft Studios with your hosts, Andy Holloway, Jason Moore, and Mike Wright.
A snake, man.
Oh, that's the way to open up a show. Slippery. Real slippery like.
Slithering all over the ground.
Welcome. It is January 9th. We are the Fantasy Footballers. Andy, Mike, and Jason back once again. It's 2018. It is Tuesday, and we are fresh off a wild card weekend. And wild it was in some ways. Boring in others.
Oh,
Yeah,
slightly.
no.
I mean,
Yeah.
you had three incredibly exciting games.
Yes, I could not agree more. Incredible games. But when Andy says boring in some ways, ding, 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 that's correct, because that Jacksonville-Buffalo game is not worth a playoff game.
You can't focus on that when 75% of the games were amazing. They weren't just good. They were amazing.
The Chiefs, they finished how they played this year. They were what they were. They started quick, and they ended sour.
Yeah, to be fair for the
And they
Chiefs,
lost Travis Kelce.
Lost Kelce, lost Chris Jones. I mean, it's like the Patriots in the middle of a game. If Gronk were to go down, that's the first thing people would talk about. Is Gronk went down. Travis Kelce is that important to the Chiefs. Although you should probably give
winners find a way, Mike.
Yeah, you should give the league's leading rusher more than 11 carries. That's just my 2 cents.
How could they give him carries, Mike? They were up.
They were up by
big at the
18
half.
points.
You got to go to the passing game.
Today is the truth episode for the wide receiver position. On this episode today, we will be going through a number of the top finishers at the wide receiver position in fantasy football. We'll be breaking down their consistency numbers, whether they actually felt like the number 2 or the number 4 or the number 8 or the number 10 fantasy wide receiver. How did they actually help your team? How did they perform based on home road splits against top defenses and against bottom defenses? We're going to give you the truth. That's what this episode is all about. We want you to be equipped going into 2018 fantasy drafts with the kind of information you need to win, so you can make an informed decision and build a roster that isn't just comprised of players based on how they finish, but also based on what they do for you. And Jason, Mike, myself, we spent a lot of time looking at these numbers, seeing how often players finished as top performers, what we call great performers versus good versus busts, what players never let you down, that type of stuff. So I'm excited.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard for the last several years how important these episodes are for future championships. I know we've heard, people go, I started listening during your Truth series on a position, and it changed how I drafted. It changed how I thought about these players, because you can't just go by end-of-year rankings. If you go by end-of-year rankings and you go, okay, A.J. Green, he finished as a wide receiver 1, he was great. He hurt a lot of players this year by the amount of bust games he had. So, we'll get into the specifics on a lot of wide receivers, but I think it's extremely important.
And you have another thing that happens at the end of the season, those last 3-4 weeks, including week 17, you're in your fantasy playoffs, you're paying attention to only specific players, and maybe a player has a very strong finish, so they move up to the top 10, the top 12. A couple years ago, I remember Jason Witten lit it up in the last couple weeks of the season, ended up a top 12 guy, but he didn't really play that way for you during the season. And so we'll try to illuminate some of those situations as well. We're going to talk a little bit about the playoffs, and if we have time, we'll get into the mailbag. We'll have a couple of truth episodes at the wide receiver position.
Yes.
And then we'll get into the tight ends, the quarterbacks as well. And look, I'm
Even
excited.
running backs. We'll also do the running backs.
Good point.
Yeah.
Excellent point.
Pretty important position.
They're going to add those into most leagues next year.
Yep.
The Titans beat the Chiefs. We just talked about that game.
What? It was a stunner, though.
22-21.
Hope you didn't turn it off at halftime.
Yeah. They were getting absolutely smoked.
Broke my bracket right there. Broke Mike's bracket right there.
In fairness, it broke everyone's bracket outside of Tennessee.
I didn't even know Tennessee was in the playoffs until the third quarter. I didn't even realize they had made it.
It was unbelievable what happens when you have a running back not named DeMarco Murray playing for that team, which I don't know if you guys saw the reports. The Titans are likely to stick with Derrick Henry, even if DeMarco Murray is healthy this upcoming week.
What?
I mean,
that's genius.
Henry was great. The team rode on his back. Mariota played well enough. We didn't even bring up the fantasy unicorn.
Oh, my goodness.
The self-pass reception
play of the
touchdown.
year.
It happened.
Marcus Mariota threw a touchdown to himself. What's the big deal?
Oh, double points.
I mean, that one play, depending on your scoring, but in PPR, that's about a 14-point play.
It would just be so
It's
incredible
impossible.
if that happened during the year. And, you get in those situations where you
DFS players were very happy.
The maximum amount of points from a possession, if you only have Mariota, it seems like it's X amount of points at the goal line. And then you double that with that whole shenanigans.
That was incredible.
You won't see that very often.
No, it's twice, actually.
Is that ever?
Wait,
Yes.
that's happened before?
Yeah, Brad Johnson.
Oh, I don't know how I forgot.
Yeah, well.
The Falcons defeated the Rams pretty handily, I would say. I mean, they were in control of the game.
Yeah, it got close there for a little bit. I mean, you got to
Honestly,
my heart breaks for Farrell.
Playoff,
Yeah, I was gonna-
playoff
that's what I was
experience.
gonna bring
yeah,
up.
Farrell Cooper.
You could say playoff experience, but I thought the Rams played just fine,
Yeah,
but
they-
Farrell
yeah.
Cooper did not. The
No.
first half, the Rams didn't get to play offense because every time that they were going to receive the ball, Farrell Cooper said, why don't you guys have it?
I believe he's an all-pro.
He had a great season. Not good in the playoffs so far.
Turnovers, they're going to cost you. The Rams, no longer part of the playoff picture.
Nope.
The Jags, 10-3 over the Bills, and immediately Buffalo has turned once again on Tyrod Taylor. He will not be there next year.
Yeah, and Nathan Peterman is not the answer either.
He ain't even the question.
Oh, I was rooting for him. I mean, that kid was put in an awful situation, and he produced
Awful results.
he produced terribly.
And in the most exciting
Well,
game,
you got to at least mention Blake the Snake Bortles. The best part of this game, ladies and gentlemen,
I got a snake, man.
was just tweeting out snake gifs to troll the entire Twitter community because everyone else is just, oh, Blake is so bad. And I'm like, just wait. Just wait. It's going to happen. And then he has more rushing yards than passing yards. Somehow wins a playoff
he
game.
won that game with his legs.
It was,
More
it was
rushing
amazing.
yards than Leonard Fournette.
Yeah, I mean, that was a gritty performance.
Oh, my goodness.
You couldn't finish
Shame
the
on you,
sentence.
Mike.
The Saints knock off the Panthers.
Oh, what a game.
Very close game. Sean Payton went for it on fourth down there at the end. Didn't want to pin Cam Newton back. I thought that was crazy.
Oh, that was.
I kept wondering to myself whether or not
I was
can
all
call
for it.
2 timeouts in a row, which I know you can't do. But I still thought he might try after he ran out there for the fourth down.
The play call. I mean,
I get it.
It ended up being really just a punt because unfortunately Mike Adams was just
Was a
playing,
dummy?
He's playing instinctively. When the ball comes to you, you try and catch the ball. I mean, it would have been really tough for.
Happens all the time.
But and I'm for the call for Sean Payton. It's 4th and 1. You have one of the best offenses in the entire league. Maybe the play call wasn't my favorite, but you get the first down, the game is done. And you don't have to worry about Cam Newton, who played sensational.
There is no question
Football.
that if Cam Newton and the Panthers had won that game, that call would
Of course.
be their whole offseason discussion. All right, let's go ahead and let's get into some more news.
Weekly Rewind.
All right, the Chiefs, let's talk about some fantasy implications from them now leaving the playoffs, the rumors that are starting. Chiefs are open to trading Alex Smith. They just lost offensive coordinator Matt Nagy to the Bears, their new head coach. Congratulations to them. I think it's a good hire, but some change.
Yeah, certainly. Their assistant coach Brad Childress looks like he's going to retire, has not been made official yet, but that's going to happen. And I think that it is a done deal that Alex Smith will be traded. This was his best season ever, so you're never going to be able to trade him for more than you can right now. And if you look at their cap situation, I think that was part of why they went after Mahomes and paid so much for this rookie quarterback, was because they are not going to be able to afford to build the team the way they want with the current money invested. So you're going to clear a lot of money by trading Alex Smith, free your team up to move towards the future, and you might get, in addition to just clearing that up, allowing you to move to Mahomes, what are you going to get, a second? Can you get maybe a first or a second plus?
I think it's going to be a second.
Is Arizona, Cleveland, New York,
Buffalo?
Where's the best fantasy destination for dynasty owners of Alex Smith, like
best
myself?
Fantasy place for Alex Smith. Ooh, man.
New York?
Yeah, maybe New York. I know it sounds crazy every time you mention anything positive about the Cleveland Browns right now, but Alex Smith going to that team, Duke Johnson, that wide receiver core.
Yeah, you got Corey Coleman
and Josh Gordon, and Rashard Higgins is a fine wide receiver 3. It could turn around pretty quickly if Alex Smith was over there being a game manager. I mean, think about how things went for the Browns with Kaiser's turnovers just absolutely destroying that team. You get Alex Smith in there, a guy who doesn't turn the ball over. That's a much different season.
They say Kaiser was the Pharaoh Cooper of the quarterback position.
Oh.
Sorry. All right, so Matt Nagy's the new head coach in Chicago. This can't be worse than what we had with John Fox. You bring Nagy in, you let him tutor Mitchell Trubisky and company, and you try to turn this thing around in Chicago as fast as possible.
Yeah, I'm with Jason. I actually think the hire is good. I like bringing in – get somebody who's not just a complete retread of a coach. You've already seen them fail miserably. Like Matt Nagy, the Chiefs' offense was very successful. He's one of maybe the only coach, if I'm recalling correctly, that Andy Reid has actually given play calling duty to. That's how much he believed in Nagy. And the Andy Reid coaching tree kind of speaks for itself. They're great philosophies. So I think this is a positive hire for the Bears.
Yeah, this is the McVay hire. We've got Trubisky. We need to get away from the old school coach and get an offensive mind in who's young, who's given a chance with a quarterback. See if you have something there in Trubisky. He'll be really interesting. You're not going to draft Trubisky next year, but he'll be interesting to watch early on, the same way you didn't draft Goff this year, but you kept an eye on it and you go, he actually looks legit.
Right.
All right, Kirk Cousins said he would sign his Tinder if the Redskins assigned him the franchise tag for a third year in a row.
You're darn right he would.
Yeah.
That's another way of saying I would accept
$30 million.
Yeah. There was another report that came out, Jay Gruden wanting essentially to get the long-term situation at quarterback figured out, kind of putting the pressure out there, whether that's to ownership, whatever. We need to make a decision on Kirk Cousins. We need to either cut ties if he's not the future or get him locked up so we're not talking about this forever. Obviously, huge fantasy implications if he ends up in another on another franchise. We're going to talk a lot about free agency. We're going to talk a lot about coaching changes. Another coaching change, the Patriots defensive coordinator, Matt Patricia. Obviously, they're still in the playoffs, but he's expected to become the next head coach of the Lions.
Yes.
So we have dedicated shows once these things are finalized to talk through the implications. Today's about the truth of the wide receiver position, so I don't want to linger there too long. And then Pat Shurmur, Vikings offensive coordinator, he had been a head coach for Cleveland. There's talk of him bringing in Case Keenum wherever he goes potentially, so that could be an interesting thing to follow as well. Any other news that you guys want to discuss before we get into the truth?
The only news I would say is, as you were describing Kirk Cousins' situation, it dawned on me that, like, I've ran through all the different scenarios. Where's he going to end up? It has never once crossed my mind that he could actually maybe sign a long-term contract with the Redskins. Like, I just feel like they hate him so much that they're not going to commit multiple years.
Yeah, do they hate him, or is he willing to sign that contract?
Maybe.
his situation is strangely like Tyrod Taylor's has been, in the sense that, like, it seems like all those around you in the organization don't necessarily want to see great success from you.
Right.
But they should, because they want to win.
Right.
It's like they only want to win with a certain player. Brooks is not. You agree with that, Brooks?
Yeah,
It's weird, right?
very.
Because I would just want to win. I don't care who it's with.
At least
The
with
Chiefs,
Kirk Cousins,
the
though,
Chiefs
he's good.
accepted winning with Alex Smith. Look at the
that's
Jaguars.
that's a really good point.
The Jaguars at the end of this season, they Super Bowl champion Blake Bortles.
I got a big snake.
Oh no! Oh no!
You know what's funny is much like what you just said about Kirk Cousins.
We are before.
Brooks, you're still here in the studio. You need a timestamp. Much like we said with Kirk Cousins, you didn't consider the fact that they could potentially sign him to a long-term deal. Anybody considering the fact Jacksonville and Tennessee could be playing for a chance to go to the Super Bowl?
Please.
No.
Please.
I mean, that would be
All you
incredible.
need is a road victory from each of them.
From each against the assumed victors of the Patriots and Steelers.
That's all you need. All right, let's talk about the truth.
You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.
Okay.
Not even talking about Eric Decker.
All right. Yeah, he's not in the list. How interesting. He did make a big play. Big
did.
play.
After a big drop.
That's what he's known for. All right. Where do we want to start, guys? We're
At
going
the
to
top.
We're going to be going from number 1 as far as we can go on today's show, and then we'll finish up wide receivers on the next one. We need to kind of define what we're talking about when we talk about consistency, and so that's where we're going to start. We're going to start with talking about DeAndre Hopkins, but all of these wide receivers, and I'll give you a chance to elaborate too, Jason, but all of these wide receivers, we've looked at the numbers, the game logs, the performances week to week, and here's a couple things we need to say out of the gate. One, we're looking at consistency in the games that they played. So we're not holding it against players that they missed a game here or there. We're saying when you started them in your fantasy lineup, how consistent were they? How consistently did they give you a great game? Now, what's a great game, Jason?
So what we've done this year is we've kind of tried to improve the process to make sure it's more accurate to what's really helping and hurting. And we changed from what used to be like a top 5 performance to actually how many points you're scoring. And we put the threshold here for the great game, that real
week winning,
yes, exactly,
top 5 type of performance on average.
We put that at 20 points, and all of this is half-point PPR scoring. Usually when you score 20-plus points, you're going to be in the top 5 at the position. But there's certain weeks, you look at week 6 this past year, Mike Evans was a top 5 wide receiver, even though he only scored 17 points. He didn't win you the week. That was just there's bye weeks involved, not as many players playing, so it's easier to get a little bit higher up there.
So essentially we're saying we're looking at, on average, where they would have finished. We're basing it off points, not on where they actually finished in the ranking.
Exactly. And then the next category we have are good games, really solid games. That's going to be on average about the top 24 wide receivers, but that will be any game over 12 points in half-point scoring.
Right. And then essentially then the last category is bust games, and that is where you would have finished on average outside the top 50 at your position. Obviously, for these players of this caliber, that's a very relevant stat because that not only it's not a null situation, it's a hurt your team situation.
Yeah, so there is this in-between area where we're not really factoring in, where you scored, around 9 or 10 points. Those games happen for everybody. We're just looking at, were you really helpful or did you really hurt my team? And then we have kind of created a custom score based on taking those 12 or more games plus 20 or more games and then subtracting out the busts and figuring out a rank for who are truly, in 2017, the most consistent, what are their consistency scores, and ranking them top to bottom. So we'll tell you who's the best, who's the worst amongst the top 24 wide receivers.
Yeah, and then Brooks looked up, just kind of interesting, the difference in fantasy points between the wide receiver 1 to the wide receiver 5.
Huge gap.
54 points on the year. That's a pretty significant
we
gap.
know that the big guys, they always come through with monster performances because, like you said, but the difference between wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 5 over 54 points. Then you go wide receiver 6 through 24. That's also a difference of 54 points. And then the difference between wide receiver 3s is about 19 points, and then the other guys through wide receiver 4, you're talking about 40 points, right around there.
It's just interesting.
Yeah. I'll start it off here before we jump into DeAndre Hopkins. Just wanted to point out this wide receivers as a whole. This was a down year. If you felt like your wide receivers weren't scoring as many points, that's because they weren't. You had this year we had 5 wide receivers with 150-plus targets compared to 9 last year. 5 wide receivers with 100-plus receptions compared to 3, so that actually went up. Here's the big difference. Only 13 wide receivers had 1,000 receiving yard seasons compared to 23 last
year. 13?
That is correct. 13.
Wow.
There was only 2 wide receivers that had more than 10 or more touchdowns compared to 5 last year. So scoring across the board for wide receivers did go down.
Wow. I guess that's crazy. That makes a little bit of sense if you consider the fact that quarterbacks – so this year we didn't have a single quarterback with 600 or more attempts. I mean, last year you had
6. I have those numbers too, Jay, if you're wanting those numbers. So
I want to hear that.
Last year we had 6 quarterbacks over 600 attempts. Last year we had 4 quarterbacks over 400 completions. This year, 0 for both of those categories. We only had 8 quarterbacks throw for over 4,000 yards, and we only had 3 quarterbacks with over 30 passing touchdowns. So there's – and I looked up just kind of scoring as a whole. This was the first year since 2008 that we didn't have a team averaging over 30 points a game. Now, I mean, the Rams were very close. I mean, they're 29.9. And then when you average all the teams scoring, in recent years it's been about almost 23 points a game for everyone. This year it was under 22. So
it's interesting.
So scoring just as a whole was
so the question is this an outlier or a trend? Is it slow the game down, run the ball more, or is this just –
You also – I mean, I have to say this. I know it happens every year, but maybe if it's a little bit more severe this year. But no David Johnson, no Odell Beckham Jr.,
the stars.
No Aaron Rodgers, right? Like Aaron Rodgers got hurt. Andrew Luck didn't play. You're missing some top-end talent.
Certainly.
You know, someone like T.Y. Hilton didn't have somebody to throw him the ball. It was –
when you look at the we brought up the difference between the wide receiver 1 and the wide receiver 5. When you lose those top options, you're losing points, in the NFL and in fantasy. So all interesting stuff to figure out the truth. And number one is coming in a second, but first we want to thank today's sponsor, RX Bar, a new sponsor of the show.
Love them.
I've had RX Bars for years. They are a whole food protein bar. They're made with a few simple, clean ingredients, which all serve a purpose. Egg whites for protein, dates to bind, nuts for texture, stuff like that. And in the interest of full transparency, all the core ingredients, they're labeled right on the front of the package. No BS here. You've probably seen these packages. You know what I'm talking about.
We got them in our kitchen right now.
We do. We got a box of them. They're perfect for breakfast on the go or a snack at the office. Throw them in your bag for a hike if you are more active than I am. And with 11 delicious flavors, they have different kinds for everybody. Sweet or savory, they got it. Chocolate or fruit flavors, they got it. There's an RX bar for you. So you can get 25% off your first order. All you do is visit rxbar.com/footballers and then use the promo code footballers at checkout. So that's rxbar.com/footballers, promo code footballers for 25% off your first order.
And I'll just throw in, we're talking about consistency. The consistency of those bars is great.
There you go.
That's a question mark sometimes with different protein bars. Those are great.
We also want to thank HelloFresh for sponsoring today's show. You know about them, Foot Clan. They're the meal kit delivery service that shops, plans, and delivers your favorite step-by-step recipes, pre-measured ingredients. You just get to cook, eat, and enjoy. With HelloFresh, all the ingredients are delivered right to your door in recyclable, insulated packaging, come pre-measured, handy labeled meal kits. You know which ingredients go with what recipe, and HelloFresh offers a wide variety of chef-curated recipes that change weekly, including the classic plan, Comes with a wide variety of meat, fish, and seasonal produce. The Veggie Plan, vegetarian recipes with plant-based proteins, and the Family Plan, quick and easy meals the whole family will love. Better yet, you can choose a delivery day that works best for your busy schedule. Even pause your account for weeks at a time. You're not going to spend all night in the kitchen because these recipes take around 30 minutes. Lots of one-pot recipes for seriously speedy cooking. They even have a 20-minute meal on the classic menu for when you really don't have that time for every week and can get that quickness in and out in the quickness. We all have used HelloFresh. We love it. My favorite, the baked chicken parmesan. It's in the HelloFresh Hall of Fame. So right now, for $30 off your first week of HelloFresh, visit HelloFresh.com. Enter the promo code Footballers30. HelloFresh.com. The code is Footballers30.
All right, the number one fantasy wide receiver on the season was DeAndre Hopkins.
But, Andy, just because he's number one does not mean he was the number one most consistent.
The number one most consistent wide receiver on the season was DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, he didn't play Week 17, but he ended the year with 96 receptions for 1,378 yards and 13 touchdowns on 175 targets.
Whew, boy. He was
unbelievable year when you consider and factor in the quarterback situation.
That target to reception number is not generally what you want to see. I mean, you want to see 174 targets.
But you'd be thinking 110, hopefully.
Yes.
And
yeah, the reality is DeAndre Hopkins was the only player this year, if you're talking why is he number one in consistency, the only player that did not have a single bust week. He did not score 7 or fewer points in one single game that he played this year, and that is
even with bad quarterbacks against Jacksonville or Arizona or Baltimore.
Matter. Hard matchups, bad quarterbacks. He had enough targets, enough volume. He was there. Coming into next year, you get – I mean, when he had Watson, he was unbelievable.
Yeah.
To the point where
24 years old.
You might go, should Hopkins go above Antonio Brown next year?
It'll be an interesting question, and I think it's a fair question to bring up. DeAndre Hopkins also negative 1.3 points against top 16 pass defenses, meaning he scores 1.3 fewer. But that's
close to nothing.
That's negligible in this area, and 2.5 points more at home. Also, negligible. That's a very, very, very small amount. So Hopkins was just
consistent.
I mean, he was smooth. He was smooth as butter.
I like it.
Still young. 80% of his games were classified as good games, which means he will be at that above 12-point fantasy mark. Like Jason said, 0 bust games, and then he was considered, quote, great. 27% of his starts. That's that top 5 type of winning week, so he contributed in that way.
That is he's almost exactly double what the average for, if you look at the top 24 wide receivers, he's almost double what the average for having those great week-winning performances were at 28%, and he is less than half of those type of weeks than the clear winner of great games. Yeah. The number 2 wide receiver finisher on the year, Antonio Brown, is a freak.
And real quick, before we jump to Antonio Brown,
sure.
I do want to say this. I think DeAndre Hopkins will represent the best top wide receiver value next year. I don't see him going ahead of Antonio Brown. I don't see him going ahead of Odell Beckham Jr. I don't see him going ahead of Julio Jones.
I bet he goes in front of both of those guys.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think, and you could be right. And maybe because of how he finished that year, he will. But you still have pedigree, multi-year runs by those other wide receivers. I see reasons why people might question it. And there are – look, you cannot just give him these numbers for the rest of his career. You had Will Fuller, who was basically turned irrelevant because of the lack of quarterback play. Other weapons around him. Lamar Miller struggled. The defense wasn't very good. There were some things that – forced 175 targets DeAndre Hopkins' way, deficits in lots of games. That being said, I still think he'll be the best value amongst those guys, but maybe that's only the difference between the number 2 pick and the number 6 pick. I don't know what that is. So Antonio Brown, Jason, the number 2 fantasy finisher and the number 2 most consistent. He did have a bust percentage of 21%. Surprising.
Yeah,
but he had a great percentage that is mind-blowing.
One of those busts was the game where he played and got injured. So, those are going to happen, and those hurt your fantasy team, but certainly not at, fault of Antonio Brown for hurting his calf. But yeah, 57% of his games were the week-winning, more than 20 points. That number is when you draft Antonio Brown, like I would, it's no question to me, assuming Big Ben is back next year, which is definitely a question. If he is back, it's Antonio Brown because Hopkins was great, very consistent, but to have those week-winning weeks like Antonio Brown gives you more than half of the games that are played is asinine. The other top 24 wide receivers, they only give you those games 14% of the time, and that's just the top 24 finishers.
And this is more than half of the games, not to mention more receptions than Hopkins, more yards than Hopkins. The difference in finish was down to the 13 touchdowns by Hopkins, 9 for Antonio Brown. We know how touchdowns, those are hard to just replicate year over year, or in Julio Jones' case, hard to get at all. But, Mike, what else can you say about Antonio Brown? Would you take him over Hopkins in a redraft?
No, I'm with Jason that if Big Ben is back, Antonio Brown will be my number one. It was in 14 games.
Yes.
Right? And that includes the injury game, of course. I mean, even if he plays 15, I bet he is back at 10-plus touchdowns. So negative 3.3 versus top defenses. So no big deal. He was 5 points better at home.
Yeah, that's only.
But that's a pretty big margin compared to the rest of these guys.
It's a big margin for your home road splits because we talk about Big Ben, not as good on the road. But when your average is as high as his is, it's like, 5 points less. Still a great game.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
All right. I think we don't need to linger on Antonio Brown. Go ahead, draft him.
Let's give some credit to Keenan Allen, the number 3 fantasy wide receiver on the season. Incredible end to the year. Mike has taken a sip. I think he's trying to get me to give him praise over his love for.
I'm here for this conversation, fellas.
Keenan Allen. Now, look, what can you say? Keenan Allen, 102 receptions, 1,393 yards, and 6 touchdowns on 159 targets. His bust percentage, only 6% of the time. Now, he did spend a good portion of the beginning of the year between the bust and good rating, where he was just lingering there.
8.7 points, 8.1, another 8.7. Those did not help you really win that week. However,
just to piggyback, from weeks 5, so 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10, so the bye was in there. That stretch, he never finished above 30 at the wide receiver position. So he had a dead zone, a 5-game dead zone that made even the most stalwart of Keenan Allen supporters, Mike, waver and his knees begin to wobble.
They did. But luckily when I fell down, Keenan Allen was there to catch me with his very secure,
rejuvenated kidneys.
Here was the nice thing is that those weeks were very down. Like you said, he didn't finish in the top 30 at wide receiver. However, as a Keenan Allen owner, and I had a lot of stock in him this year, you were fine on those weeks. When he would put up 5 for 60, you weren't thrilled. You didn't get a monster game, but he had enough volume in the targets where he didn't completely crap your team and throw up those Des Bryant disappearing games.
And I'll say this as well. Considering that Keenan Allen had played 9 football games in the past 2 years, it took some time for Philip Rivers to remember, oh, yes, Keenan Allen is, in fact, a great wide receiver, and I need to throw him the ball 10-plus times a game.
25% of his games, and he played all 16, which is more than the top 2 guys on this list can say. But 25% of his games,
also the most Keenan Allen can ever say,
were week-winning performances. Number 2 against Buffalo, followed by 4 and 4 against Dallas and Cleveland, and ending the year number 1 against Oakland. Impressive.
Yes.
Where does he go next year?
It's more the same. Keenan Allen, the only knock for Keenan Allen is injury history, which
nice to put a 16-game season under your belt.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to change people's minds of the injury history. He was still a pretty highly drafted wide receiver. Maybe he moves up into the back of the second round, because if he gives you 16 games, he will give you numbers similar to this. Maybe the yardage comes down a little bit, but you're still talking 100-plus receptions easily, in my opinion.
Yeah, this last year, the reason I had him a lot was because I could grab him in the 4th round.
Yeah.
And that's great. I think Keenan belongs in that second-round conversation, maybe even near the top of the second round, and I'd be happy to grab him.
And just to add in, he also has negligible defense and home road splits.
Julio Jones was the 4th-ranked fantasy wide receiver, but he felt much more like his consistency rank, which was number 8. Finished 88 for 1,400-plus yards and 3 touchdowns on 149 targets. And when you look at Julio's season, what blows me away the most is you'd never had back-to-back weeks where he was inside the top 12. You never had 2 weeks in a row. And so you'd get that
That's
little
bananas.
You'd get the burst week 2, okay, or maybe week 7, or against Carolina, or when he was number 1 against Tampa. You'd have these games, and you go, here he comes. Here comes Julio. And then the next week, you know, he had 4 games this year where he was outside the top 38 for Julio Jones. I mean, his bust percentage was 19%. He was good 44% of the time, and he was great only 13% of the time.
I have an idea for Atlanta. Play Julio Jones only 50% of the time. Let him sit every other week. Let him he needs to rejuvenate.
You're saying so you can start somebody else?
Yes. So
Mohamed Sanu?
So I can start someone else, and then they get that big game because he's only got the energy for every other week.
Minus 5.5 points per game against top 16 defenses.
That's not what you want to see from
That's
your
a
stud.
pretty big, yeah, that's a pretty big disparity. Julio, and now that doesn't mean Julio was struggling against that coverage. Fantasy-wise, it does. But it means that part of it is games, you know, they seem to go away from him when they have a matchup that they're worried about.
Yeah, and another part of that number, so that you don't worry too much, because Julio was still very good. You know,
yeah,
number 8 in consistency is nothing to be too sad about. But that split between top defenses and bottom defenses, part of that is really skewed because of the 46.9 points he put up against a bottom defense in Tampa Bay. So that's going to, I mean, you can't really fault him for being too good against bad defenses.
That's a great point.
Larry Fitzgerald was the number 5 wide receiver
This
in
one was
fantasy.
really interesting to me.
Finished the season with 109 receptions, 1,156 yards, and 6 touchdowns on 162 targets. And we talked about it all through the year. Larry at home.
Yes.
7.5 points better at home.
Big number.
Incredible difference. His consistency rank, 13.
First wide receiver here in our list to not be in the top 12 most consistent. And that was really surprising to me because you're talking about a guy who had over 100 receptions. Usually those PPR-type guys, like we'll eventually here get over to Jarvis Landry. You know, those.
Whoa, Jason.
I'm just saying. Well, he's a wide receiver. We'll talk about him.
You don't know how to
run
a countdown.
I'm just saying he's in the top 24. So
top
someday.
100. He's in the top 100.
But Larry, he really did have those. I mean, he was boom or bust to a degree. He was, you know, he didn't kill you that often. So his bust rate was 25%. A quarter of the games he really killed you. Thankfully, with him, you kind of could see some of those games to sit him. He was on the road.
You see, you know where backup quarterbacks really struggle?
On the road.
On the road. So when you have, I almost said Skelton. My goodness.
Oh no!
When you have,
don't do that.
Don't go back to the past. When you have, you know, Drew Stanton and Blaine Gabbert on the road with Carson Palmer going down, that had to have added to that disparity.
Yeah. Yeah, so he had 25%. The other quarter of his game were those league-winning over 20-point games. So basically 50% of his games were just negligible. And I will take 50% negligible, 25%, you know, high games and 25% bust.
I was going to say that you look at the percentage of his great to good, and they're actually very close. So, I mean, it's everything he got from Larry. When he gave you a good game, it was not just good. It was generally a great game.
A lot of question marks on to whether he'll return for another season in 2018. The Cardinals, Carson Palmer is retired. Bruce Arians is retired. And
I'm shaking up my Kirk Cousins pheromones.
Look, whether it's Kirk Cousins, Alex Smith, Case Keenum.
This is for you, Larry.
If they get another quarterback, Larry will be back.
Wait, as opposed to not bringing one in at all?
I'm saying as opposed to if they draft a rookie in the middle of the first that they hope they can develop.
That's when he could.
That's when he
bricks.
might go. I don't want to do this. But if they bring in,
that's when you see the ghost of John Skelton.
Yeah, if they bring in a vet like what you just named, Sam Bradford, even maybe Teddy Bridgewater, then
Brett Favre.
He still got it. He still got the cannon.
What about Josh McCown?
No. Well, that is interesting because he played with.
What about
Larry.
Ryan Fitzpatrick?
No, definitely not.
Well, I just like Josh McCown that he can finish where he started.
Oh my gosh, back in the 70s?
Yes.
Michael Thomas, number 6 on the ranks. Number 6 on the consistency ranks.
That's how you do it, Michael Thomas.
Very consistent.
Look, this was a funny year for Michael Thomas, but the numbers bear out how it feels.
Just wait till you hear the great and bust percentage.
Yeah, he was 104 for 1245 and 5. Nothing to be upset about with those numbers. 149 targets, no great defense splits, no great home road splits. Actually, a little worse at home, which is strange. But he was great 6% of the times. He busted 6% of the time. And he lived in the middle. He lived in the middle.
He was wide receiver 6, consistency rank 6. 6% of his games were great. 6% of his games were bust. No, I'm not marking the beast because we're going quattro.
Oh, all right. We're safe.
Yeah, we made it. But Michael Thomas.
Yeah, but that's one game, by the way. 6% is one great game.
There's
one bust game, and everything else he was just kind of like.
There's another wide receiver we're going to talk about a little bit later that you think, this guy, I paid up the draft pick for him, and he was a bust for my team, and you're staring at him as a wide receiver 1, and that's why Michael Thomas felt like a bust. 6% of his games were great. He never carried your team, but 50% good. That's tough to do.
I will say this, looking into it, and I know who you're going to talk about in a little bit because it's really surprising, but there are those players, like a lot of people that drafted Michael Thomas were disappointed in Michael Thomas. You shouldn't be. You definitely shouldn't have been. For where you got him, he performed. He did enough. But it does say, this is what it says to me. It says that when you're playing fantasy football, you need to put a little bit of extra weight on the ability to carry, the ability to have those Antonio Brown week-winning games. It's just difficult because you don't want a guy that can only do that or go away.
That's why we talk about balancing your roster when you're drafting.
Yes, but up at the beginning because there's not that many people that can give you any week-winning games. So when you're in that first round, I think that's the issue, is if you're drafting a guy in the first round, you have to get those week-winning performances. And
I
that's
actually
why
agree with that. I mean, we're going to talk about Jarvis Landry. He's got the same amount of great games as Jarvis Landry. That's the problem. You drafted Michael Thomas thinking you might get, 4 or 5 week-winning performances. He gave you the same as Jarvis Landry, and you come to expect Jarvis Landry to actually be a more functional wide receiver, too, on your fantasy roster.
We did see a complete shift, though, of the New Orleans Saints offense. That was not I don't say that. It was definitely not expected.
No, but we did know that he was going to have to step into the wide receiver 1 role,
but that wasn't
in lieu of Brandon Cooks, who made the big plays. And a lot of people just wanted to take Brandon Cooks and the big plays and just give them to Michael Thomas, and we didn't get those.
Right, yes. But, I mean, over 100 receptions, over 1,200 yards. The issue was the touchdowns of – we did not see Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara, Super Camario, becoming the go-to for the New Orleans Saints offense. That's the difference. Well, you didn't get a 5,000-yard season from Drew Brees because they didn't need it.
But shouldn't that be a lesson to us as fantasy prognosticators that when you're in the offseason and these things are laid out before you, there are look, if the most valuable thing that you have when you talk about any of these wide receivers is multi-year stretches of productivity. Because you have guys like Michael Thomas who had 1 good year as a rookie, and you cannot perfectly project what that team's going to do, what the offense is going to do. Sean Payton, no Brandon Cooks. When you have consistency from a team perspective, not just a player, quarterback, offensive coordinator, scheme, all that stuff that you get with Antonio Brown, that you get with players that have done it multiple years, that's when, we didn't know, like you said, to be fair,
that's what I'm saying.
We didn't know, but we didn't know. That's the point.
But it wasn't something that you could have projected. I mean,
yeah, you can. Well, my point is, can't you project that you don't have 2 years of consistent performances back to back?
Yes, but you can say it's the same head coach, same offensive philosophy, same quarterback. So that's why I think it's not. I would not beat myself up if I drafted Michael Thomas and felt like I made a mistake.
No, number six. So Jarvis Landry was number 7
in half-point scoring.
Felt like about number not 7,
and
to me, and yet was the fourth most consistent fantasy wide receiver. 112 receptions on 160 targets, under 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns.
That's the big one.
That one saved the season, so to speak. Different quarterbacks than we expected. Tannehill going down, Jay Cutler coming in. Only great 6% of the time, but good 63% of the time. So 63% of his games, he was in that top 24 category.
See, I actually think, forget fantasy, I think Jarvis Landry is a top-notch wide receiver. In real life, I think he is an elite-level talent and had bad quarterback play, has had mediocre quarterback play for a long time. But if you look back at this year where he was drafted, as he kept slipping down in drafts because Devontae Parker coming up, I think he was one of the better picks this year. He got the touchdowns to help him out. He was super consistent. And for a guy that you're going to get in those kind of early middle rounds, what more can you ask for? You're not – if you look at who is able to put up the week-winning performances, they all go – in that first, second round. So when you're looking later in your draft, I think I'm looking for a guy like Jarvis Landry, who finished as the 4th most consistent wide receiver, really didn't have many games that killed you. Even if you go higher and you say, okay, like a wide receiver 30 or 40, he still only had 4 games on the season where he wasn't a wide receiver 30. That's a really low percent for wide receivers. So if I'm plugging a guy like that in as my second wide receiver, use him in a flex, I love it.
As long as you're paying second wide receiver price, which you
did this
year, he's the guy that you love having in the lineup. Now he's a free agent.
See, the price for him is a big question.
And there are those that want to believe he's going to be the next chain-moving wide receiver in New England, that he's going to be picked up and signed by the Patriots. The most recent report that I have from late December was that, look, Jarvis Landry and Miami, they've exchanged contract proposals, kind of at a standstill. Got in a big fight with Kenyon Drake. Kind of seems like Adam Gase is talking about him in a negative light, in the sense that hard to control him. He has some of the same things going on that Odell Beckham Jr. has had going on in New York. His good buddy. He plays with fire. Love him. Agree with Jason. Great player. Not sure he goes somewhere and puts up better numbers than what he had in Miami.
He sent him to New York. I mean,
with Odell?
With Odell. I don't think he will be back with Miami.
I agree with you.
Because
that's where I would handicap.
He's a second-round pick. So this guy, and he has vastly outperformed his second-round draft stock. He deserves to be paid, and he is going to take nothing less than getting paid. So yeah. I don't think Miami's going to give him that contract. I'm not sure where he will end up, but I'm with Jason that I think Jarvis Landry is one of the better wide receivers in the league.
The one nice thing I'll say about him leaving and going to another team is the fact that we have seen Jarvis Landry with different head coaches and different quarterbacks always be utilized the same way. So I think if he goes to another team, we can have a little bit more confidence that, yeah, that coach is probably going to do the same thing. Pepper him with targets, keep him on these short routes, use him the way that he's made to be used.
Dynasty fantasy football question here with Jarvis Landry. I know we like him. We like the receiver. If you had the opportunity at this time, would you be buying or selling Jarvis with the unknown moving forward?
To piggyback and comment on what you said, Jay, I'd be selling him, because I think that while you're right, a coach is going to use him the way that he meant to be used. There's every chance that he goes to a team that has a better wide receiver core than what he has in Miami. There's never been a competing force. Parker's never become that. Stills has never been volume. If he went to a place, hypothetically New York, or any place with an outside one that actually receives target volume, that would be my concern about these, because he's needed 100+ receptions to be this kind of guy. Or, 9 touchdowns. I don't know how much you can count on that from his size. He's normally a 6-touchdown guy. So give him 95 and 6, and he's not in this category anymore.
Right. That's fair. That's fair. Because of his age, I don't think I would buy him right now, because right now owners aren't scared of him leaving. I don't think we're into next year's offseason mentality, but I would wait a couple months if he leaves, if you get scared. He's still only 25 years. I think he's good. So I would be willing to buy him.
If he got signed by New England, for example, you'd be able to trade him at the Brandon Cooks premium that you had this offseason, and he might not be as good in New England as he was in Miami from a fantasy perspective. People have been trying to give Wes Welker's numbers to players for 5 years.
Man. If you Jarvis Landry, put him in that Edelman role.
I know.
Goodness, 200 receptions.
This is what people have been saying forever.
Buy him.
Tyreek Hill, number 8. Finished the season at number 8. Consistency rank number 9. Tyreek Hill through 15 games, he was rested in Week 17, 75 receptions, 1,183 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Boy, those numbers, they remind me of Vincent Jackson's numbers back when he was catching passes.
A little bit more, higher
touchdowns,
on the
though.
I think he's higher on the receptions.
Who is?
Tyreek Hill. Wasn't
V-Jax was a 67 to 75 guy. But he also had 59 rushing yards. Tyreek Hill was interesting. Now, the thing that blows my mind, this is confirmed he's negative 10 points at home.
Well, because he was his monster games all came on the road. Week 1 against New England when he was 133-1. Week 3 against the Chargers, 5 for 77 and 1. Against Oakland on the road, 125-1. In all his monster games, the Jets on the road, 185-2. That just skewed his numbers for whatever reason. Him and Alex Smith they were roommates, I guess. They'd get together, they'd play some spades, and then they'd.
That's what roommates do?
Well, maybe, I don't know.
In the NFL, yeah.
I'm not a spades player, and then you'd throw them touchdowns. So Tyreek Hill on the road was magical this year.
He was.
One of the things that I really liked about having Tyreek this year, we're talking about that this episode, but he was able to provide those week winning games. 1 in every 5 games this year for Tyreek was a put your team on the back, win you the week, over 20 points type of performance. And even though he seemed like he was up and down, because he did go back and forth. Literally, it was we made jokes
at the beginning of the year.
At the beginning of the year, it was like good game, down game, good game, down game. The down games weren't 0 games. His down games, he had 2 full. He had four bust games, which is pretty normal for a top 24 wide receiver. But he had a lot of those every other week games that were around the 8-9 point thresholds that you can bide your time if you've got a guy that can have those monster weeks when their down weeks are more around the 8 points versus the 3 points.
If you are going to go running back early next year, do you want Tyreek as your one?
Ooh.
With Pat Mahomes maybe being the quarterback?
Mahomes, that's risky. I mean, it could work out because Mahomes, at least in college, he has the gunslinger, a little bit of Brett Favre.
Great deep ball.
But really, really strong arm. So that it could be a perfect match. Could be interesting.
I would be fine with that. And it's not just because of the deep arm, but because of Tyreek's speed just beats guys. I mean, a lot of Alex Smith's, 40-plus yard touchdowns, they were 10, 12, 15-yard throws to Tyreek who, went lightning speed after he caught the ball. I think Mahomes could do that as well.
Also, he scored once at home. And
wow.
It took until week 14 for him to score a touchdown at home.
Let's talk about Marvin Jones, the number 9 fantasy wide receiver this year. Marvin Jones with the same amount of great games as Julio Jones. Because that's what we expected. Consistency, though, he ranked 18th in consistency. So he really he had the up and down type of performances. 61 receptions is really why that is. When you only have 61 catches, which is half of a Jarvis Landry pretty much, but you get 1,100 yards, 9 touchdowns, he basically was a boom bust.
18 yards per reception.
Yeah, boom bust guy, 18 yards per reception.
That's Deshaun Jackson.
He wins at the point of attack. He wins on the deep ball, and he showed the ability to do that all year long. So whether the fantasy numbers were consistent from week to week, his ability to catch that deep ball, it persisted through the season. What do you really make of Marvin Jones' year, and where would you want him next year? I mean, his defense against defenses that were in the top 16, he actually played very well.
Yeah, he has no
his
abnormal
teammate
splits.
was wide receiver 15, Golden Tate.
And that's who the Detroit Lions are. They can't run. Maybe they invest in a running back in the offensive line, and we see some changes to that. But, I mean, this is like the Saints, right? Yeah, no, Amir Abdullah, yeah. Pour one out for my homie. Marvin Jones, he should be a middle round wide receiver. I don't know head-to-head if I'd rather have Golden Tate or Marvin Jones. I mean, we mentioned it. Tate was wide receiver 15, so clearly Marvin finished ahead of him. But I think I might take a little bit. Tate might be safer, except I'm peeking it. Maybe he's not.
I would take the 5 guys after Marvin Jones in this list over Marvin Jones.
I would as well. I think the reason
I will not say.
The reason we like Marvin Jones this year is because of where he was drafted. Because
yes,
he was the 9th wide receiver on the year, but again, he was 18th for consistency. Now, hey, that's still a top 20 guy, but if he's drafted next year as a top 15 wide receiver, which I think he might sneak up to that ability because he's got the big game potential and people want to swing for the fences. I don't want to spend higher capital on Marvin Jones, who does have the because he's 18 yards of reception, he's not a big volume guy, and so you have a lot of games where maybe it wasn't a complete and utter bust, but it just too many games that were poor.
And the smooth routes are coming.
Yeah,
the smooth routes are coming.
All right, we're gonna round out this episode with number 10 on the list.
Oh! Hooked on a Thielen.
Adam Thielen.
Oh!
The 10th ranked wide receiver and the 10th most consistent. Started the year on fire, didn't end it that way, but 91 receptions for 1,200 yards and 4 touchdowns on 143 targets across, the Bradford Keenum experiment. What do you make of this year from Adam Thielen? I mean, I know we loved him. He was a UDK feature for us, but you got to be happy with number 10 here.
You got to be happy with him. I agree. He was a late-round steal. His splits basically don't exist. It was you could play him in any particular matchup, but he was busty in the wrong spots. And what
does that mean?
You know what I mean.
I genuinely do not know what you mean.
Busty in the wrong spots.
That's the final 3 weeks of the season. 30 yards, 24 yards.
I used to say that about John Candy.
60.
Oh man,
why you gotta pick on John Candy?
I love it.
Moving on. We are buffoons.
I should have said Andy Reid.
You should have gone with Jason Moore.
Oh, that's not nice.
R.I.P.
Now John Candy and Jason Moore in the same sentence. Congrats, Jay.
30 yards.
# life goal.
24
Not the
yards.
first time. Won't be the last.
30 yards.
Oh, my
24
goodness.
yards. 61 yards. The final 3 weeks of the season. Of
What
course,
was it? I mean, was it just game flow, a healthy Stefan Diggs? I mean, we missed Diggs for a good part of the season.
Yeah, it's one of them. I would, just factor in. It was against Green Bay on the road. It was freezing. It was kind of a strange game. That was the 16-0. But right before that, at home against the Bengals, 3 for 30. That one was extremely surprising.
Adam Thielen, 50% good games, 31% bust. No splits to mention, and a heck of a year. So he's going to finish up this First Truth episode. We'll be back on Thursday with the second half of the Wide Receiver Truth episode. Hopefully this information was helpful, and we'll talk to you soon. Make sure you check out jointhefoot.com, our fantasy football community. Come hang out with us, get an extra episode every week. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Fantasy Footballers Podcast. Join our fantasy football community on jointhefoot.com and follow us on Twitter @TheFFBallers.